Welcome to another SmartQA Musings, which is really a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. Today is the part 2 of a trilogy that we started last week. And this is titled Rhythm. It is in the cadence of the testing act. The quick background is every system has a pulse. There is a rhythm that we feel when it flows, and of course hence the instant when it breaks. So this SmartQA Musings is about a second movement, so to speak, as part 2 in the trilogy, following the fluidity, which is really about the flow that I talked about last week. So the trilogy, as you might have noticed, was titled last week as The Human Symphony in Testing, and last week we talked about, or we looked at the notion of flow, the fluidity, right? And this week the intent is to look at rhythm, and next week the intent is to look at it from dialogue, where we are reimagining the testing as a performance, a dialogue, a relationship, rather than just an act of meeting criteria. So when we look at the entire testing and when we see deeply, it reveals hopefully a more richer dimension. Like a symphony, it kind of moves through distinct yet connected movements, shaping how we engage with systems and outcomes, and therefore it flows in the approach we take. It finds a rhythm in the act itself and turns this into a dialogue where we listen and outcomes reveal. So the last time was about flow, this time it's about cadence. And from flow to cadence to listening, testing in a way becomes a lived experience of discovery. And that's really the focus of this trilogy. Right? So in a way we started with an inward notion last week. This time it's a bit of the outward notion and listening, and next is about the interaction of the inward and outward, which is the dialogue, which is the next week. Right. So when we looked at it, when you look at the act of what we're trying to do is evaluation, we looked at it from an inward perspective of fluidity, rigidity, flow, etc. Now let's turn up our perception a little outward. Is there a rhythm in the systems that we expect? And if so, what qualities emerge when we listen with that refined awareness? That's what probably is, in some sense, what we're going to muse about. This is where rhythm lives. Right? So previous ones we talked about how confusion, fatigue, boredom can be turned into a diagnostic instrument. We refined our inner sensitivity. Now we listen outward to the rhythm of systems and experiences. Earlier, it was really about, when we say test, it was about quality maybe meeting some criteria, like the FERPs, right? The functionality, usability, and so on and so forth. So once we measure, now maybe it is time to look at it from a feeling perspective. It lives in a felt experience, the presence of an interaction, the rhythm of the responsiveness, the attention that guides their entire interaction, and the joy that we get from the experience, which uplifts. So, when did a product last make you smile? Because it felt right. There are very few products that we possibly have which makes that right. And all we're trying to do is to examine the notion of quality from our experience, from our lived experience. And that is where the rhythm, which is really a bridge between the human and system, and where the quality becomes felt. So let's see what might be some rhythms that we can possibly use, and therefore test little more at a higher level. One, it may be the notion of responsiveness, the tempo. So I'm using a Google map, I'm going around, suddenly I miss the route, it reroutes, right? And maybe it just is smooth. Of course, if you use it in a Garmin kind of a device, you understand that it just says rerouting and it just continues on. There is a constant tempo. It seems to be very alive and responsive. Whereas some of the softwares that we use, which seems very stuttering, like maybe the railway reservation system, for example, probably puts up a lot of stuff. It seems to stutter. Somehow it doesn't seem, has a rhythm and a tempo. The second could be the notion of a sustained kind of a note, a flow, as if music is constantly flowing out, a presence. So I guess the closest analogy, one of the analogies, could be like the Google Docs, where when you type on a shared mode and somebody else is seeing, they see that the cursor kind of blips there. It shows you what's happening. It shows that you're connected. So my song is heard by somebody. Feels alive. On the contrary, if I finish the document and probably send an email and as an attachment, it's kind of broken because I can feel your presence. So maybe that's a kind of rhythm. I can feel the presence as maybe sustained notes. Right? Or maybe it's attention. Attention as some kind of a melody. Melody doesn't necessarily mean sound, right? It just means a very clean guidance instead of annoying pop-ups, a quiet emoji, a little something that shows up. Maybe like some of the phone softwares that you see. Very clear guidance, so that it's more melodious, right? So we're looking at it from tempo, notes, melody, and the last one is harmony, which ultimately brings us joy. Rather than, a flat screen, which is like an app, if there's a bit of a tiny little animation, maybe the way it expresses itself kind of brings about some kind of harmony and joy. Maybe like the Blinket's playful animation versus the other's flat screen. So we're trying to look at probably the larger context of quality and validation itself. Maybe using the idea of rhythm and using some ideas like these, the tempo, the sustenance notes, a melody, and finally a harmonic kind of a resolution. I'm sure we all experience it in our own ways. It's very difficult to put it down on paper because it's more of a lived experience, right? So some of these like this. Like we probably send messages, we use WhatsApp every day. When somebody is typing and both of us are connected, you see that the guy is typing because the dots seem to move around. It seems to be telling, hey, somebody is doing something. And the messages are reasonably instant. And the act of the moving dots, the typing dots, indicates a certain sense of presence. The flow and the closure in probably a phone page seems nice. So these are examples of some of the commonplace softwares that we possibly use, and there may be many more ones where the notion of rhythm is beautifully seen, right? The tracking of real time in any of these softwares, could be any of these, whether it's the Ubers or the Blinkets, the real time tracking keeps some kind of a tempo alive. You know where it is, where the stuff is, where the car is, or where the item is. And the fact of a Garmin or a Google Maps or any of these stuff which constantly keeps you on the road and keeps you mapped, it's reassuring when you go off track because they sustain a flow. So these are examples of where we talked about the 4 rhythms and how some of these softwares probably show this and how you can see rhythm in some action. Right? And when this rhythm holds, quality is no more about just measuring criteria. It becomes something felt, which is what we are. Because I think we have kind of, as humans, gone beyond just the needs. We expect more. And we all know quality is a sum total of needs, meeting the needs, and satisfying expectations. And today, with brilliant technology, intelligent systems, we somehow have taken needs in some sense for granted. We think it can be done, and it is done. But what more? And that is where the expectations have risen. And it's quite natural, because after all, humans are greedy, right? We expect more and more and more with more and more new technology. So quite naturally, the act of how we validate, ascertain, maybe even design, has to be in the same context. We can't just look at criteria. It has to be something more felt, lived. So that's the shift. Does it work? Which is the traditional kind of possibly approach to how I look at validation and testing. Whereas, how does it feel to live with this system? And I'm not trying to invent another jargon, but if I were to give it a name, like traditional versus something, I would say rhythm aware, something like that. So when a messaging system like WhatsApp, for example, when you send messages and it's kind of instantaneous, you feel very connected, you feel the other person is there, and it's kind of quick. And you respond because it pops up if you're enabled there. But then if you even have, so people have full-fledged conversations, and I'm sure we all do that. But a small lag, maybe even a couple of seconds, it seems to break the rhythm, breaks the conversation. That's the expectation that we have now, right? And that's a big shift. Now, looking at it from a perspective of, okay, there is a system, which is the software / system, and there is the user, the audience, and there is us, the testers. How do I connect it in this context? Maybe by using the idea of a performance metaphor, where system is like a performance. It is delivering a performance, and the user is like the audience enjoying the performance, should be enjoying the performance. And tester is like the listener, which is tuning the perception to sense where rhythm flows or falters. So, if you view the entire act as not as a static product, a static system doing stuff which a user is using, and we elevate it to the fact that the system is delivering a performance via its various features, and the audience is enjoying the entire performance, and all we are trying to do is we are just tuning in that perception to sense and ascertain if the rhythm flows or rhythm falters. That's what probably we are. And today we are blessed with probably intelligent softwares and systems in AI to be able to go all the way to assist us in this entire journey. So testing really is in some sense a performance art. We listen for timing, we look for phrasing, we see and seek harmony in the entire system. Right? And that's the whole idea of rhythm and cadence in the entire act that we are doing. Right? In a way, it's, when you're listening to Spotify, when everything is transitioning properly, a song finishes, another song comes up, no problem. But then if there is a little buffer of this ad and it breaks the performance, it's like jarring, right? Because any beautiful performance, our ears are so sensitive, especially if you enjoy as an audience, that any little jar is noticed by the audience. And that's what we're trying to do. So it's like the example of a beautifully streaming music, little jitter, a little buffering, it's kind of gone. And that's the idea of a spotless performance, a perfect rhythm. So what does it involve? What we're trying to do is we are kind of becoming more sophisticated in our perception. So in a way, we are probably developing a higher order listening, developing more sensitivity like this. So we're not just evaluating and measuring and passing or failing, right? We're looking for shifts in tempo. Well, we're not measuring per se 0.788 seconds of the mail, but if you're able to see even the shift, maybe even a half a second of an extra load of an email, maybe on Gmail, it's seemingly small in terms of a number, but you feel it. So suddenly you can feel it and then say, that's not nice. It kind of jars my experience, so to speak, a little. I'm having a conference call, maybe I think my audio and video reaching you on time and they are in sync. I don't know, but I'm quite sure if there's a tiny little lag, if you can see the difference between my speaking and what is shown up on my lips as moving, or if there is an unstable piece, you know that. Even a little jitter, the presence that is broken. So what are we doing here? We are listening, we are seeing, we are feeling, and we are becoming more sensitive to the lived experience that we have is the software. Or we are doing some job, and suddenly there is a promo ad, or suddenly there is a pop-up, or suddenly something changes on that screen, or suddenly something is running, which I'm quite sure we all experience when we watch sometimes the TV news, very distressing, right? And there's a friction to the attention. And if you're an Apple person, I'm sure you probably feel it. You're doing something here, it quietly syncs up. It comes up on all the other devices. So if you're sitting with possibly an iPhone or an iPad and a MacBook or something, I do something on the notepad here, and if I'm all synced up, it just quietly shows up. Or if I say, hey, I'm going to put this on silent mode, my PC becomes silent too. It's so beautiful. I only notice it when it breaks. Right? I'm working with a government portal. I'm doing some interesting job, and suddenly it broke. Maybe all I did was, to think for an extra few seconds, and then it said timed out. It's a gap. It destroys the harmony of this entire system. So, what we I think are tuning into is becoming more sensitive. And that's why it's the human side, right? And we're becoming more, the perceptions are heightening, we're becoming more sophisticated. So it is more like a rhythm that we are sensing, not just measuring. Of course, I'm not denying the fact that the notion of standard measurement can be discarded, but we are elevating ourselves, we're becoming more smarter in the entire context of being more perceptual. Right? And therefore, it is not about just checking or testing or exploring the correctness or the speed, but we are now tuning in to begin listening, noticing the tiny pauses, the flows, the handshakes between the actions, the responses. So as we get into a more rhythm-aware validation, the first thing is we must learn to listen. Let the system play, because it is performing, before you start grading it, right? For example, we might use a completely different software like Notion, and we may use another software like DigiLocker, for example, right? In the Notion, it's the software like Notion, they may serve different purposes, but the notion seems very effortless. You seem to think and it moves, though it's not the same exact applicable comparison. Like the software where I store my documents is functional. It seems very hesitant, it pauses, it makes you feel its weight. The idea is to look at it from the notion of rhythm awareness. So ultimately, when I don't know that I'm using a piece of software, that is the ultimate experience, right? That I am merged with it. And that is probably the best experience that we all have. So a software like Notion works with the thought speed, so to speak. The DigiLocker might be more like felt pauses. So once we've turned our ear, all our heightened senses, I use the ear from us because rhythm is more sound, but technically it is perceptions and from all the sensorial pieces that we have. So once we have turned our ear to rhythm, we practice it deliberately. So the idea here is, in addition to all the things that we wonderfully do today, aided by technology, driven by automation also, the idea here is, how do we become more sensitive? How do we become more deliberate in this notion of rhythm aware? Maybe these are 4 tips. Maybe these are 4. And the first 2 are like this. Maybe listen. So just listen to the system. Then maybe look at it from different time scales. Smoothness of scrolling versus a stale kind of a feed. Right? Is it scrolling beautifully? So it's like across, as the journey progresses, as the performance moves, how does it behave? Is it smooth? Is it in harmony? Is it off note? Is there a delay, for example? I order something, it confirms maybe after quite a few minutes. Is that delay, which today may not be even in minutes or even tens of seconds, it's expected to be reasonably instantaneous. So, is it off note? Right. Especially important in a more transactional system. And finally, the notion of using the body as an instrument. Am I fatigued? Maybe I use some of the banking software. Certainly I'm fatigued. I'm not going to name any banks, but some of these banks, because of the garb and probably maybe much needed security, they will force you to get an OTP. They will ask you to do that in less than 30 seconds. And even though the action can be done in about 3 steps, they'll make it look like about 10 steps. You get your OTP, you have to do this here, do this there, etc. It's fatigue. So using the body as an instrument. So the idea here is for me to be able to kind of do a rhythm aware testing or validation. Maybe some of the 4 tips could be, are you listening? Are you looking across a performance as a journey, as a time scale? Are you heightening your awareness in sense of seeing, listening, perceiving, and finding, is there anything that's a slight amiss, a little jar? And finally, are you feeling the heat? Are you feeling the heaviness? Are you getting fatigued? And therefore, this is like a small set of practices that we are trying to build upon into our human side, so to speak, which I'm sure in various forms we have, and therefore use it to our advantage. Daily habits with our tiny rhythm checks that we use to validate softwares, right, or systems. Now what happens when it breaks? I think here, what are the converse? Connection is poor, I'm driving in a car, suddenly a massive traffic jam, it breaks, it destroys the flow. And quite naturally it causes fatigue later. Sometimes when we use software like bookings, they succeed, but it lags. It drains the energy. Right? Some of these banks do that. The act of doing a transaction, though seemingly simple, it drains me. And I'm happy to get out of it. So for me it's a chore. And that's where I feel that the rhythm is broken. When I can make it much more joyful, which I think I did have a webcast many months ago on such experiences that I had with some softwares. Constant pop-ups, intimating you, warning you, selling to you, they exhaust me. And of course, the notion of timeouts, you've got to do this within a particular time. If you don't, I will log you out. Or here is an OTP, here is a CAPTCHA, here is another OTP, here is another CAPTCHA. It turns the entire item into a fatigue. So you can sense the fact that when the rhythm breaks, a flow is destroyed, the energy is lost, it's becoming exhausting, it turns into tiredness. If you feel those when we transact with the software, then probably it's one of those softwares that it may be functionally very rich, but people probably will switch if they find the first alternative where it is the experience is far superior, where it can satisfy and make the entire thing a joyful experience, right? Because it's all about expectations. So when the rhythm breaks, functionality isn't enough. We all know that. We all know there is needs and expectations, and needs and functionality and attributes are what we conventionally call as non-functional. And we know that it's no more just the need. It is about attributes too. But now we are elevating it to the next level from a human aspect, the lived experience, which in this case we are looking at it from the rhythm that we experience, treating the entire act as a performance and looking at the users as an audience. Now, is rhythm only available in UI-oriented systems? No, not necessarily. Be it APIs or headless systems or services, any headless stuff. There is rhythm. Systems breathe that. Maybe it is in the temporal steadiness, it is in the continuity of the messages, is in terms of the orchestration. The rhythm doesn't vanish when screens disappear. The systems without interfaces still breathe. They just breathe differently. For example, in a microservice, there are probably correlation IDs, the numbers which carry where if they drop, the services break. In a way, the correlation IDs are like melody. The drops break the tune. In a streaming system like Kafka, for example, the rhythm comes from the balance, the harmony in the flow of data, because it's ingesting a lot of data. When the back pressure is tuned, the system self-regulates. It adjusts the tempo gracefully, keeping the orchestra in perfect tune and time. But when ingestion floods, it bursts too fast, too uneven, cues pile up, the lag spikes, that music turns into noise. Right? So that's in a streaming kind of a system. Obviously, in a payment kind of a system, the rhythm is a heartbeat. You tap the pay, balance updates, all in one smooth. But if the confirmation lags, maybe it takes a little extra time. Anxiety replaces assurance. So here, testing is about sensing the tempo, the commit, the confirm, the feedback. Because we want a trustworthy rhythm. Right? You want to feel safe. And that is where this back-end systems or headless pieces have a significant role too. We're not just talking about some beautiful UX and visual stuff. This is also there in the headless pieces, the back. So testing now is probably a refined perception, where we started out by saying it is moving from checkers of correctness to perceivers of experience. So we're just tuning in much better. Would I want to live with this daily? Probably, because it enables us to deliver a higher value. We saw this. Before we close down, what causes a rhythm to break? Lags, timeouts, flatness, visual noise, inconsistent flow. All these are rhythm breakers, right? Be it in the front or be it in the headless system. So when you want to integrate the idea of rhythm into the practice of what we do, quite obviously it consists of two parts, the notion of our conventional validation checks, which are quantifiable. Does it pass? In addition, we are trying to do qualitative sensing. How does it feel? So when I say validation, it simply means, yeah, it is successful. Its performance is less than 2 seconds. It is secure. Something like that. Whereas when we're talking about rhythm, we're really saying, is the weight feel assuring? Does the animation celebrate? Does the tempo match the intent? And therefore, it's more of a feeling perspective. Right? So we're trying to think of, can I integrate, and what does it take to integrate the rhythm awareness into what I do? So in closing, when a rhythm stays steady and the presence feels alive, when the attention aligns with the intent and the joy animates discovery, the testing is harmonious. It transforms into a harmony. And if I were to elevate it all the way, maybe it is like saying, if rhythm studies and awareness deepens, testing begins to sing. So, what we just talked about in the trilogy that we had was to look at the sensing of rhythm from the systems that are being built, compared to the first one where we looked at my own states of shadow, which heightens my perception. And the next one is, how do I see this interaction of me with the system? Is there a dialogue, and how do I use that? So we are kind of moving in from the flow to a rhythm to a dialogue. The testing evolving from doing to listening, from assurance to artistry. Thank you so much.